education and law degrees from the University of the Philippines. He earned an MA in political theory from the Free University Amsterdam, where he is also pursuing a doctorate in the philosophy of international law. He teaches international law and human rights law at three Manila-based schools and is a member of the Department of International Law and Maritime Law of the Philippines, ah, of the Philippine Judicial Academy. He recently served as a visiting professor in Christianity, Politics, and Society at the Asian Theological Seminary. He has contributed essays in international law and theology for volumes published by the Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, and Baker Academic. He has an extensive experience litigating public interest and human rights cases before the Philippine Supreme Court and other tribunals. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Attorney Romel Bagares.
Thank you, Suka. Let me just fix my alarm clock so I know that I'm well within the time given to me. It's a pleasure to be part of this activity. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on what I hope would be a relevant topic. And let me then share my presentation. Sorry, give me a minute. I think there, I pushed the wrong button. So let me know as soon as you see it. Is that okay? Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. Well, the title is towards normative politics in the Philippines, reformational approach. Now, take note, it is not the Christian approach, but a reformation approach from a particular tradition of Protestantism, meaning that there are, of course, other traditions. And I hope that in presenting this, you will have a more enriched understanding of this tradition in Protestantism that actually has given birth to a long history of political engagements in Europe, for instance, having organized the very first political party in Northern Europe, and today is experiencing some sort of a revival because it is once again being studied, being investigated, and being applied in other contexts outside of Europe. So I hope that by presenting this perspective, we'll be able to learn something. Now, well, we've just cleared probably what is our most contentious, most contested elections post 1986. And we've heard so many discussions about, the Christians from different political positions saying, well, God is sovereign, and therefore we must just sit still and accept what has taken place, and we can be sure that God would work things out according to His promises in the Bible. So therefore is the question: what do we mean when we say God is sovereign in the midst of political life? And I've been to church services talking about the fact that God is sovereign, and indeed we affirm God's sovereignty. The question is that how exactly is that sovereignty displayed in not just our political life, but in all spheres of human life? And when Christians invoke the Bible and say Jesus is Lord, what do we mean by that? And of course, we're part of this long tradition, this long history. Christianity has been around for a couple of thousand years. And we're not the first people in the world to declare that Jesus is Lord. And one of probably one of the leading expositors in the modern era of a Protestant view of politics. Not well, principally because he started a uh, 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 very famous movement in the Netherlands that established uh, Christian politics there for many decades. Abraham Kuyper, a statesman, a journalist, he was really a polymath. One point, the Dutch Prime Minister. He was the one who famously said that there's not a square inch in the whole domain of human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry mine. And for the Dutch Christians who were schooled in this tradition called Neo-Calvinism, uh, the famous battle cry is sovereignty in eigen kring. Literally, each sphere is sovereign in its own orbit. And this was really uh, the notion, the concept, the principle that has governed the carrying out of this political movement arising out of Neo-Calvinism. Now, what is Neo-Calvinism? Otherwise known as the Reformational movement. Uh, Kuyper first elaborated this idea in English in his famous Stone Lectures in Princeton. It's every year there's still the Stone Lectures, in fact, but he delivered this in 1898. No? The idea, he was really wrestling with the rise of modernism. That was the term used, and the increasing secularization of society. And he was wrestling with the question of how should Christianity how does Christianity survive uh, this seemingly insurmountable wave of secularism? And Neo-Calvinism therefore became a movement that looked at active cultural engagement based on the notion that God is indeed sovereign in all of creation, and that all Christians from different spheres, different traditions, not just theology, but all disciplines should participate in the reformation, the inner reformation of the different spheres, you know, of academic life, of political life, of cultural life, of art, of all spheres of human endeavor. And this is really what he was trying to unpack, the idea that God is sovereign in culture, that all of civilization is normed all throughout. We cannot escape the normativity of civilization, of human civilization. And therefore, the task of Christians is to disclose, not just to discover, to disclose and to nurture these norms, because these are norms that God has intended for human flourishing. And these are norms that we can only ignore at our own peril. So the basic confession is that all that exists is part of creation, no? And the place of human beings being the bearer of the Imago Dei, they bear this immense responsibility in disclosing the diversity of responsibilities of relations throughout generations. And it's not just government that has the task, but the different spheres of life in disclosing and nurturing these distinct ways of life, this distinct articulation of excellence, distinct articulation of responsibilities. No? Because there's not just one responsibility, but and therefore, when you talk about the Bible, then and what it means for this task, the biblical story catches up the whole of created reality, encompassing all that exists and all that humans will ever be and do. That is why in political cultures of our day, we must find ourselves in the biblical stories. In other words, we must also therefore consider politics as part of the biblical story, as part of uh, creational intents. Um, I don't know. Most evangelicals probably don't really say this in church. I come from a Christian community that does say this regularly every Sunday. when we say, and this really reflects what the Bible says, no? From Genesis to Revelation, the movement from creation, redemption, and consummation. We believe when we say we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, Maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, begotten from the Father, before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of the same essence as the Father, through creation only limited to Bible studies. But when we actually look at this confession, we actually affirm that everything under creations is part of God's plan. It's part of God's mandate for us. So we talk about math, we talk about political science, we talk about chemistry, we talk about sociology, we talk about theology, we talk about law, medicine, we talk about the differentiated human responsibility. We are co-creators, we are co-makers, uh, 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 and we answer to God, who is the ultimate creator of all that exists, the maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. And therefore, we understand that there's a universal scope of God's creational ordinances. The unfolding of schools, of markets, of museums, of the family, of the church and state. In universe today, we're told that all of these are human creations. No? The idea that meaning is made, but that is contrary to the Christian confession. The Christian confession is that God is creator of all that exists, of heaven and earth, whether visible or invisible. Mathematics is as much part of creation as music is, as law is, as medicine is, as architecture is. They are all these differentiated human endeavors. They're part of the responsibility that God has entrusted to us. That is what we mean when all of civilization is normed all throughout. How are we able to distinguish the distinct structures? Why can we? How are we able to say that a school is not the church and a museum is not the state? The church is not the market. They have constant features that urge themselves upon us. And therefore, the task for us is to be attuned to these normative structures because it's part of human responsibility to give form to the creational norms for each. So the story of creation, fall, redemption tells us that there are creational norms, creational intents, but at the point of the fall, these have been perverted. But of course, there's also redemption. Creation is is indissolubly linked to redemption, because the question, what needed to be redeemed? You go back to creation. So we talk about technology, art, business, state, sexuality, schools, universities, corporations, our emotions, our exercise of rationality, marriage, and other forms of human relationships. They are governed by the norms that God has set in creation. But they answer to two tendencies: the tendency of the human heart to sin, or the tendency of the human heart to obey God's design for creation. And as I said, all of these things urge themselves upon us, and we can only deny them. We can only go against them at our own peril, because according to the Christian confession, creation is meant for human flourishing. It's not meant for our ill, but that creation was meant for human flourishing, for our own good. I mean, when God said that creation is good, that's all part of the goodness of creation. So either we are obedient in our response, or we pervert it. Marriage may be perverted today, but it will not erase the normative character of marriage. We may have a dictator, but it will not erase the normative character of the state. We may have art that has been taken to the wrong direction, but it will not remove the normativity of art. Why do we answer to at the gut level? We always have the sense that art, there's no need for justification for art. Art is part and parcel of human experience, and that's because it's part of creational intents. Technology is good. Rather, technology is also normative. And when we talk about all these algorithms, all the designers of algorithms come from particular premises. And most of the time, these premises are really distorted. They come from a distorted view of the human being, of humans being selfish, of humans being economically rational, of human beings being only after their own interest, and that is why we are in such a deep mess today when we talk about surveillance capitalism and the like. So there's this cultural mandate for all of these different shaded human responsibilities, and the confession then enables us to say that we are to observe the norms that God has designed for these activities. So when we talk about God's sovereignty, therefore, we're talking about the norms that God has set in place for these differentiated human responsibilities. There's a lovely quote from Herman Bavinck. The world is a unity, but that unity manifests itself in the most magnificent and beautiful diversity. Heaven and earth were distinct from the very beginning. Sun and moon and stars each receive their own task, and animal and man each have their own nature. Everything is created by God with a nature of its own and exists and lives according to a law of its own. So there's therefore no problem with affirming historical development of a differentiated creation, provided that we understand the normative requirements of such historical development. The development of science, of technology, the advances of the sciences, the building of cities, and the disentanglement of various distinct relations within society. These are all fundamentally appropriate human responses to God's command to realize the possibilities of creation. It is the responsibility of Christians to affirm normative differentiation in the context of the coming of the kingdom of God, while opposing all misdirection away from the glory of God. And one of the key tenets of the Reformational perspective or of the neo-Calvinist perspective, is the idea of the antithesis. So there's an ongoing battle between Civitas Dei and Civitas Terrae, the city of God, and the city of man. And that battle is not that begins in the human heart. It is a struggle between the inclination to submit to God and the inclination to rebel against God. This personal and public conflict between the kingdom of light and darkness, Neo-Calvinists call the antithesis. This struggle is not relegated to some spiritual realm above or alongside or in paradox with everyday common life. Rather, it is a spiritual struggle for everyday life itself. And therefore, this struggle is also manifested in different realms of culture, not least of which is the political realm. So there's a struggle in the realm of art, in the realm of culture, in the realm of politics, in the realm of journalism, in the realm of the family life, even within the church. Some people like to mark out the church as a holy place, but even that is driven through with the antithesis, because it begins in the human heart, this battle, this ongoing battle between the Civitas Terrana and Civitas Dei. And this is also expressed in how a contemporary politics imagines the place of individuals. So we know that and in fact, even Christians unknowingly also adopt the idea that humans are this actually conflicting tendencies. Humans are autonomous and self-directed, and with inherent rights to seek their own happiness. On the other hand, there is also the scientific view that persons or humans are shaped by environmental forces and are just the sum of physical, biotic, and psychic pre-programming and social conditioning. So you have these two ideas of the human person, and they they actually are fundamentally opposed to each other? Are we really just, a product of our context, or humans are self-directed and can actually construct their own meaning, their own reality? And there, in other words, these are constructions of the human self that are incoherent and that are fundamentally opposed to each other. Uh, and one tradition, which is also adopted by a huge part of Christianity, is the idea of the Greek Aristotelian, the idea that mature rational persons or humans are the most free and self-directed, and therefore the basis of an ordered society are rational individuals. But from this perspective of the reformational tradition, humans, male and female and intergenerational, they bear the kind of responsibility unique to them, having been created to love, serve, and reveal God through friendships, marriages, families, development of the earth, education of the young, and the like. So it is not one particular human function, because the dominant, I think even within many Christians will agree that say that we are rational animals, following from Aristotle. But from this distinctive tradition in Protestantism, there's not one particular human function that gives humans our identity. But that in bearing the imago Dei, this identity is revealed in our differentiated responsibilities. Of course, there are interpretations of the imago Dei along the Aristotelian lines. That is why humans are most of the time called rational animals, and that's one dominant interpretation. Uh, so when talk about the political sphere, we have all these traditions: the Anabaptist, the classical reform, and also the Roman Catholic political system. So Anabaptist, anti-state; classical reform, the state is only established to restrain sin; and the Roman Catholic view, kingdoms of this world they positively serve Christ's kingdom if they give the church special assistance. Um, but there, according to the Reformational view, there are missing elements here. The account of how Christ's kingdom extend over all things in heaven and on earth, and that we should not identify the church with the kingdom. No, the church is just one aspect of the kingdom. No? Why is that? Because humans, being created in the image of God, reveal God in the exercise of a variety of responsibilities, friendships, in our marriage, in our education, in politics, in the way we relate to the environment, etc. And so when we talk about the antithesis, then you have this illustration where different spheres are driven through with that line. That line moves every day. No? The temptation for many Christians is to categorize the creation to good or bad. So rock music is bad, art is bad, Bible studies are good, and that belongs to the world. No, but that's not how, according to the Reformation perspective, that's not how we should understand creation. Church, family, politics, business, art, education, journalism, thought, emotion, plants and animals, inanimate matter, they're part and parcel of the antithesis, the struggle between civitas Dei and civitas humana. So even the church, despite all the Bible studies, will be riven with sin, because the church sinful human beings. And therefore, when talk therefore about secular sacred, this is how we should imagine it. That there's the secularity is the advancing of that line closer to the world, closer to sin, rather than to God. No one is exempted from this battle. So when talk about the gospel, then according to the Reformation tradition, the gospel must be understood in universal terms, that God the Father has reconciled his created but fallen world through the death of his Son and renews it into a kingdom by his Spirit. So what is to be saved? Well, I became a Christian by saying that I'm sinful and need to be saved. That is true. But if the scope of sin is cosmic, then the scope of redemption is also cosmic. That's what the book of Romans say. All creation groans for longing for salvation. So the gospel is not the four spiritual laws, but according to the Reformation tradition, the gospel is God the Father reconciling his created that fallen world through the death of his son and renewing it into a kingdom of God by his spirit. So then we must look at how structures and individuals relate to one another. No? Because the problem with contemporary political theorizing is that society is imagined only according to individuals. There's nothing else but individuals. So between the state, then you only have the individuals range against the state. And in fact, we look at all the jurisprudence on freedoms. The political imagination will not admit of any other variable except individuals. No? The problem is that well, according to this premise, even communities are just products of self-sufficient individuals who freely form contracts to create them, and therefore individualism alone is an adequate guard against state totalitarianism. But there are problems to this view. First, if rights are conferred only upon individual persons, then we cannot talk about public rights and public justice, because public rights and public justice will be seen from the point of view of the individual. There is no real public there but individuals. Second, by the individualistic theory, by granting rights only to individuals ultimately disregard the state's public duties. Well, that's the flip side of the coin, because if public duties are reduced to individual rights, there's no public duty. You cannot talk about the public if it is reduced to individual rights. Third, the theory is unable to satisfactorily explain the state's relations to other communities, other than saying that they are fictional or legal products of legal fiction. Well, in law school, you are taught that the corporation is a legal fiction, but you have corporations that pollute the environment. You have corporations that take part in human rights violations. How can legal fictions of that sort make all of these harmful activities that impair the lives of so many? So this difficult, therefore, to explain communities by simply by the single metric of the individual. And fourth, it is also unable to adequately account for the proper duties of the state. Precisely. I mean, you only have, how do we account for indigenous people's rights if it is to be understood from the point of view of individual rights, for instance? No? What about the right of association? So many. What about the right of religion? Even academic freedom is understood from the point of view of an individual academic, never from the point of view of institutional academic freedom. And that's the problem when you reduce everything to individual rights. So we need an alternative pluralistic ontology. And there are two Christian approaches to societal pluriformity. I understand that Archbishop Ledesma is unable to join us tonight because of sudden pressing engagement, but he made a presentation, and I think he covered this part, the first part, on the Roman Catholic idea of the common good and subsidiarity. So I will just briefly skim through this because he will make a presentation after my presentation. He's recorded the video presentation, and I think that he should be able to interpret it better than anyone because it comes from the Roman Catholic tradition. But basically, the premise of subsidiarity is that the state is part of the body politic, and it is the highest when it comes to the secular institutions. Society is made up of the state, smaller communities, and individuals. So this is the famous explication by one of the leading neo-Thomist political theorists of the 1950s, and I think until today he's considered the leading interpreter of the notion of subsidiarity, Jacques Maritain. So you can see there the state, the highest organ, occupying the realm of nature. So you see this nature-grace dialectic coming from Aristotelian philosophy, which is the official, the Thomism being the official philosophy of the Catholic Church. So the church is at the highest rung, the realm of grace. And then you have in the realm of nature, the state is the highest organ. And then you have mediating structures, schools, communities, markets, NGOs, the family, and the lowest being the individuals. And according to Jacques Maritain, these items that you see occupying the realm of nature pertain to the body politic. So all of these constitute the body politic. Now, so another illustration of the notion of subsidiarity. So you see that the church occupies the nature-grace tradition in the Roman Catholic Church, very influential in how it imagines societal ordering, societal and political ordering. You can see that the church is the highest, and then in the realm of nature, the state is the highest, and everything else follows there. You have all these intermediary structures, and then you have individuals at the lowest bottom rung. Now, the Reformation or the neo-Calvinist stream of Protestantism is fairly old also. When the first systematic exposition came from Johannes Althusius. The secular academy usually attributes the idea of federalism to Althusius. And Althusius was a Calvinist jurist. He was the first to systematically express uh, political and legal thought that became the foundation. The idea of checks and balances in government, the inner structural principles governing distinct institutions, and even the notion of federated states. So the book is Politica. It's also right now being rediscovered, because of what he originally thought of. So he, from the Reformation perspective, Althusius uh, the was the first to say that not every societal entity, such as families, churches, is part of the state. The only true parts are solely provinces and municipalities. Well, Aristotle said that the family is part of the state, and there are a lot of implications to that teaching. That is why even in the Thomas tradition, and even in the earlier Reformed history, the elections, the right to vote was attached to the family, to the head of the family. That is really Aristotelian in character. No? But Althusius, of course, he was influenced by a lot of these because he was part of Reformed scholasticism. But he was the first to articulate that not every societal entity is part of the state. No? And then he said that there are proper laws, no, leges propriae, according to which particular associations are ruled. No? So there's a distinct rule for churches, distinct rule for unions, for guilds, and as there are distinct rules for the state, and you should not mix them up. The rules for the state do not apply to clubs, do not apply to the church. They're distinct in the same way that the rules for the state, for the church, should not apply to the state. That's what it means in some when you talk about the principle of leges propriae. And then that this was taken up. That's why it's called in literature the line from Calvin to Althusius to Prinster and then to Kuyper. And we said earlier that Kuyper his battle cry was sovereignty and thing. And this was actually interpreted as a progressive political stance that democratized political participation, because he really was concerned about the klein Luiden, the little people, that they do have in political life. And he worked this out systematically in his idea of sphere sovereignty. The idea of today is called in by some of his contemporary interpreters as principled pluralism. So the principle, the Protestant sphere sovereignty. So you can see, in contrast to the Catholic version of societal uniformity, there's no hierarchy there. Club, marriages, church, family, school, state, business, labor union, they relate to one another in equal terms. The only true sovereign there is God. And this is what we mean when we say that God is sovereign, because he has written into creation norms for the proper functioning of all these different expressions of human civilization. And the proper functioning of these aspects of human civilization are meant for human flourishing. They're not meant for our destruction. So sphere sovereignty can be expressed in terms of differentiated responsibility and distinctive integrity. So the church, there are things that the church cannot do. The church is not the state. Neither is the state the church. Nor is a corporation, nor is the church a market, or the state a market. When people say that in terms of the state, we should start calling citizens consumers. Something's terribly wrong with that, or clients, because you are imagining the state as a market. And what's wrong? And you understand then that state becomes a profit-taking institution and nothing more. How? Why do we say that education is not for sale? Why do we say that education is meant, has a different purpose? We are able to say that because there are constants according to the confession. Now, there are constants that allow us to distinguish these spheres, from one another. So let me now just I have 5 minutes according to my clock, no? And then I think the other aspects I can discuss now. So when we think about society, then there's traditional political theory. Even the neo-Thomist idea seems to collapse civil society into one big body politic. No? But from the Reformation tradition, you see this differentiation of spheres. You have a distinct place for science. So when you have COVID-19, it should be a proper, it should be medicine driven, not military or politics driven. No. Government, sports clubs. Look at Wesley So. He has to go to the US because he said sports in the Philippines is all about politics. So you know that there's this idea, intuitive idea, that sports is sports. It should not be connected to political, to the political life of the nation. Schools are schools. They're not markets. Well, there's a proper place for the market. And their markets are norm as much as grammar, language is norm. The family is a distinct institution. Contrary to postmodern thinking, the family is not a human creation. It's part of God's creational norms. And it can be perverted also, in other words, away from its norms. And there's no single reality, single aspect of reality that defines what we are, but there are multifaceted reality. In the neo-Calvinist today, Reformation tradition, there are 15 such aspects that are called irreducible, the coherence of irreducibles. They are interrelated, but at the same time, they have distinct natures of their own. So when we talk about societal spheres, so you have the view of government being one of differentiated responsibility. So the task of Christians then is to actively engage in efforts to make every societal institution assume its own responsibility, warding off the interference of others. That too is participation in the restoration of creation and the coming of the kingdom of God. So therefore, implications. When we approach government, therefore, we should not look at it as a power broker, but as the authority that ought to uphold a just public order for them and for all of our neighbors. Second one, the work of government is not a means to other ends. No. Contrary to liberalism, freedom, or to Marxism, socialism, such as human freedom or economic prosperity or the enhancement of the nation's strength. Government's purpose is to uphold a healthy public commons in which the great diversity of human activities, as well as complex social and ecological balances, is maintained for the long-term well-being of everyone. That is really a natural outworking of the idea of sphere sovereignty, because you have distinct spheres and they have differentiated responsibilities and interests, and and their natures must be respected by the state. Yet government has, and this comes from that, government has a responsibility to do justice to individuals, families, churches, and other non-state, non-political dimensions of society, none of which is reducible to economic considerations, otherwise known as the idea of structural pluralism. Fourth implication, those who disdain government and the political process dishonor God and their own humanity. It is legitimate, even a duty, to criticize unjust and bad government policies and public officials, but this should be done by calling government to fulfill its proper task and high purpose. So let me end this with a quote from a book by Paul Marshall, God and the Constitution, Christianity and American Politics. And he said, what is needed is not more calls for rectitude, cries for crusades, complaints of corruption, or claims of cynicism, but in part an exploration of the nature and place of politics itself in the world. It requires knowing what most politics is, that most politics is more like raising children than raising hell, more like gardening than grandstanding, more like work than warfare. It requires recognizing that politics will not bring in a utopia or even anything remotely like it. It will neither conquer sin nor change human nature, nor will it create a society which will not need reform the instant after it is reformed. You know, Semper reformanda, reforming yet ever reforming, reformed yet ever reforming. Nor will it create a society which will not, but politics can make a difference in whether our schools are better or worse, whether it's safer or not to walk home on a dark night, whether people are healthy or hungry, whether or not we will live more at war or peace. While such struggles and policies are full of victories and defeats, they have no final victory or final defeat wherein we could properly and finally say we have won or we have lost. Politics is part of an ongoing life in the world to be pursued patiently and faithfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Rommel. Wow, that's a very, very loaded presentation. For our responder is Archbishop Emeritus of Cagayan de Oro and co-convener of the Philippine Ecumenical Peace Platform. And he is not able to attend to us today. We attend today because of his current engagement, but Archbishop Ledesma sent us a video reaction of the presentation of Attorney Terence. So, Archbishop Antonio Ledesma is currently the chairman of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, Episcopal Commission on Interreligious Dialogue, and member of the Episcopal Commission on Social Action, Justice, and Peace. He attained his master's degree in political science from the University of the Philippines. He attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the United States, completing his doctorate in development in 1980. From 1982 to 1996, he worked as a professor and was assigned to various positions in Xavier University. He taught sociology, economics, and religious studies. On March 4, 2006, Archbishop Ledesma was appointed by Pope Benedict as Archbishop of Cagayan de Oro. And on June 23, 2020, our Archbishop retired. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Archbishop Ledesma.
Okay. A good day, my friends. Professor Romel Bagares has given us much thought about the various dimensions of faith and politics and principled pluralism. For this presentation, I would just like to focus on the common good and how this is related to human rights. And much of this is really taken from the social teachings of the Catholic Church, from its various documents. The first one, from the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, we hear the statement, in our time, the common good is chiefly guaranteed when personal rights and duties are maintained. Furthermore, the political community pursues the common good when it seeks to create a human environment that offers citizens the possibility of truly exercising their human rights and of fulfilling completely their corresponding duties. So the right to vote, the duty to vote, we have just experienced in our recent elections. But what is then the common good? In the key document of the Second Vatican Council, entitled The Church in the Modern World, or Gaudium et Spes, the Latin title, I quote, "The common good is the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily." So the common good is contrasted to the personal or individual good. Again, the principle of the common good, let me just go over this one by one. First, it stems from the dignity unity and equality of all people. So it stems from human dignity. Secondly, it is not simply the sum of individual goods of each person, but it remains common and indivisible. It again pertains to the good of all people and of the whole person. The person exists with and not for with others. It also involves all members of society. Everyone has the right to enjoy the conditions of social life brought about by the common good. Again, the responsibility of every individual person and also of the state is mentioned in our duty to bring about the common good. And this is the task of government to harmonize the different sectoral interests with the requirements of justice. And this is also what has been mentioned earlier as the principle of subsidiarity and leaving to lower bodies their own autonomy. But there is a transcendent dimension to the common good. Again, the compendium of the social doctrine of the church states God is the ultimate end of his creatures, the transcendent dimension of the common good. Our human history begins and ends in Jesus. Thanks to him, by means of him, and in light of him, every reality, including human society, can be brought to its supreme good. So this pertains to the sovereignty of God over all things and all persons. What then is the goal of the common good? The goal of the political community exists for the common good. This is its full justification and meaning and the source of its specific and basic right to exist. The common good embraces the sum total of all those conditions of social life which enable individuals, families, and organizations to achieve complete and efficacious fulfillment. Human rights, then, are connected to the common good. First, we recall the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which for John Paul II was a true milestone on the path of humanity's moral progress. Human rights are also inherent in the dignity of every human person created in the image of God. It is also the ultimate source of human rights in man himself and in God, his creator, not in the state. And human rights are to be defended as a whole, not only partially. Finally, we recall that the history of struggles for human rights, like versus slavery, racism, religious persecution, is still a developing phenomenon. And in that sense, human rights are dynamic. They have to be fought for, to be maintained and promoted. Pacem in Terris, the encyclical of Pope John the 23rd in 1963, gave the Catholic Church and the rest of the world a systematic view of human rights. There in that encyclical, he mentions 8 rights that should be promoted. First, bodily rights, which pertains to bodily integrity, the basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, health, and social security. Secondly, communication rights, freedom of expression to truthful news. And we keep in mind also the freedom from fake news. Third, religious rights to religious belief, to worship God privately and publicly, to freedom of religion. Fourth, family and vocational rights, to choose a state of life, to found a family or singly, to create, to procreate, to proper conditions for family life. A fifth human right is economic rights, to free enterprise, to work, to adjust wage, to organize unions, to private property also. Then you have associational rights, to social interaction, to assembly and association, to form intermediate bodies and societies. There are also the rights of movement, to freedom of movement, of residence and nationality, to internal and external migration. And finally, political rights that we have again recently exercised to participate in public affairs, to political participation, to the electoral process itself. So these are all human rights that have been systematized and presented to us. But this is one, maybe one way of showing those eight forms of human rights, from bodily rights all the way to political rights. And it shows you also the interaction of these rights. But then more recently, we have also a growing awareness of other human rights, the right to life itself versus the death penalty and maybe euthanasia or mercy killing, the right of the unborn versus abortion, the rights of cultural minorities to their culture and to their ancestral domain. Now we talk about the rights of nature itself, and this is related to our concerns on climate change. There is also the right of a community to a healthy environment against pollution. And we now talk, the United Nations has presented to us the Sustainable Development Goals, which practically also shows the positive side of human rights, namely eradication of hunger, poverty, also sustainable and lasting peace. In John the 23rd's encyclical, Peace on Earth, he points out the four pillars of peace and also of the common good. And I quote, "The social order requires constant improvement. It must be founded in truth, built on justice, and enlivened by love. It should grow in freedom towards a more humane equilibrium." So these are the four pillars of truth, justice, love, and freedom. Pope Francis, in a more recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, mentions that social charity makes us love the common good. It makes us effectively to seek the good of all people, considered not only as individuals or private persons, but also in the social dimension that unites them. Good politics will seek ways of building communities at every level of social life. Here again, and Benedict XVI, in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, points out the connection between charity and the common good. The common good is the good of all of us. Again, this is another description of the common good, made up of individuals, families, and intermediate groups who together constitute society. It is a good that is sought not for its own sake, but for the people who belong to the social community and who can only really and effectively pursue their good within it. To desire the common good and strive towards it is a requirement of justice and charity. In earlier societies, we have the notion of the commons, like common grazing ground or the common forests for the use of everyone. It is not appropriated as private property. Today we have public plazas, we have public squares, which is a form of commons that is for the benefit of everyone in society. So politics itself, according to Pope Francis, is, though often denigrated, remains a lofty vocation and one of the highest forms of charity inasmuch as it seeks the common good. This then is the vocation of every politician or statesman to work and promote the common good. And politicians, for Pope Francis, says, "I beg the Lord to grant us more politicians who are genuinely disturbed by the state of society, the people, the lives of the poor. Openness to the transcendent can bring about a new political and economic mindset, which would help to break down the wall of separation between the economy and the common good." This then, my friends, is a summary of our understanding of the common good. and that it is also connected with our promotion and defense of human rights. And finally, that the goal of government itself and of political leaders is to promote the common good for everyone. May this then be our own understanding of participating in the public life of our country. These are some of the references that I have mentioned, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Bishop Ledesma, for your very informative information and discussion on. And for our question and answer, I would like to invite Dr. Lim and also Attorney Bagares to be with us tonight and answer the questions from our viewers. Okay, so I'll start with the first question. This came from Federico Villanueva. He said, very interesting. Para kina Kuiper, ang divine sovereignty led to active engagement in society. Pero bakit sa ating sa Pilipinas, parang baliktad? Dahil ang Diyos ay sovereign, so ipinapasa Diyos na lang natin lahat. Hindi na tayo nakikialam dahil kontrolado naman ng Diyos ang lahat. Bakit kaya nagkaganito ang view natin sa sovereignty of God? So, we'll start with Attorney Bagares and then Dr.
Salamat kasi dito sa atin mas nasa spiritualize lahat So kaya Kuiper kasi sinabi ang naging problema pa bakit yung secularization patuloy kasi nga hindi nakikialam yung mga Kristiyano sa sa arte, literatura, sa cultural work dahil sa tingin nila hindi nga ito bahagi ng Christian life. Pero sa kanila nga part siya ng creation politics is part of creational intents Kasi kung hindi naman nagkasala ang tao, walang estado na may monopolyo ng violence, pero kailangan pa rin ng organization, Yun nga yung ibig sabihin ng naming of things, Na merong organization na kailangan gawin kasi kung maraming tao, kailangan mo ng organization of some point to make it work, kaya nga kung yung divine sovereignty is interpreted in terms of disclosure, societal disclosure of the normative, So, ano yung norms about this pertaining to the state? So, maraming maraming ginawang investigation tungkol diyan, yung due process, constitutional rights, Yung idea na yung pinuno ay hindi siya parang Diyos na walang limitation sa kanya na kahit ano pwede niyang gawin, Napakahaba at napakalalim ng naisulat, maraming naisulat na yung mga Kristiyano, ang problema hindi natin nababasa. Kasi mas familiar tayo sa tradition natin yung pietism, At sa tingin din natin hindi naman tayo bahagi ng tradition na yan kasi born again tayo, protestante yung mga yan, hindi sila Kristiyano, So I think we need to understand therefore na yun nga ang divine sovereignty is really creational norms, and that if these creational norms are actually transgressed, then civilization falls ill, So kung leaders therefore pag-usapan, we will then measure them according to how they actually follow the norms for the state, for the church, the norms for the market, the norms for art, the norms for culture, norms for schools, At how do we find out all these norms? Kaya binigyan tayo ng Panginoon ng utak Part siya ng cultural mandate natin na pagyamanin natin ang ating yung tinatawag na societal disclosure, Kaya dapat baguhin natin kasi tayo sino man nakaupo diyan, opisina yan sa Reformed thought, yung pagiging tatay, pagiging nanay, pagiging anak, pagiging kapatid, opisina yan. Yung pagiging pinuno, opisina yan. Pagiging pastor, opisina. Pagiging elder, opisina. Regardless of who actually occupies the position, mayroong norms for that office. And you are measured according to the norms for that office. Si Bongbong Marcos ka man o si Leni Robredo ka, kailangan sumunod ka dun sa norms. So ngayon, presidente presumptive president, he just needs to be formally sworn into office, When he becomes president formally after being sworn into office, he becomes subject to the norms of his office. That's how we should think about it. as Christians. Now, whether or not you voted for Bongbong or not you voted for some other candidate, anybody who occupies that position is subject to the norms for that position. And that is how we should understand the creational intents and the divine sovereignty expressed in the idea that all of civilization is normed all throughout.
Thank you, Attorney Bagares. Siguro, Dr. Lim, baka maaari mo namang palalimin yung diskusyon tungkol sa sinasabi ng Attorney Bagares about yung norms. Kasi, di ba, yung norms, depende yan eh. Being a theologian, maaari mo kaming bigyan ng insights about this.
For me, we are now in a democracy, no? And so I blame our so simplistic understanding of a very fatalistic understanding of the will of God, no? Na bahala na ang Diyos, you know, to a very cultural tendency, no, of fallen perspective. Na whatever happens, you know, will ng Diyos yun. And so that kind of mentality has been augmented by our what we would call the evangelical tradition that has Romans chapter 13 as its basis, no, for all interpretations of church and politics and church and state, no. And so we have to tackle both, no. One is the cultural part, and that needs education. That needs to outgrow your fatalistic understanding that whatever is there is already God's will, no. That you almost are helpless to change it. So that kind of mentality we have to overcome, no. And that is the realm of education. If you talk about sphere sovereignty, you know, in the way we have to educate our people. Why? Secondly, our interpretation of Romans 13 has been uncontextualized. In other words, we live in a democracy, no longer in a monarchy, and so the Romans 13 verses 3 and 4 should allow us to have dissent, criticism, even the existence of opposition, diba? That the will or this sphere of politics, no, under democracy is a different dynamic from monarchy, no, and the imperial Roman Empire of the New Testament. And so that kind of theological education, that kind of what we call a change of and transformation of our mindset, you know, has to happen in our seminaries and Bible schools. And so for the leaders of our churches, most of their instinct is the traditional evangelical tradition that was passed on to us by the American missionaries. No, of course, not all. No, in fact, there are many good American missionaries, especially in the Episcopal Church, among the Presbyterians and Methodists. Pero siguro minority lang sila. Dahil the moment they establish Bible schools and seminaries, ang mga tinuturo, no, very passive and a very almost negative view, no, of government and state. And almost Anabaptist, no, in its approach, and so very pietistic, and in the language of Attorney Bagares, very what we call secular, and very what we call I want to call it. I'm just missing the word that he used, pero that. The mentality, the mindset is really kulang, no, sa enlightenment. And so the whole, as my last statement, the whole presence we have today now in the Philippines for our normative politics, we have to think democracy. And democracy assumes that the authority resides not in the president, not in Malacanang, but in the people, no? So the preamble of our constitution says that we, the people, determine what is our government, and so with that, that is what our book will be all about, to help our pastors and our future thinkers to really believe that how can we best be good Christians in a democratic society without the fatalistic, pietistic, I think that's the word, na pietistic understanding, no, na we are just going to be good citizens, meaning just very passive ones, no. But I think the reformational understanding is that we have to be active, we have to be enlightened participants in the molding of the common good, in the molding of social justice for a good governance in our country. So that kind of mindset setting is a challenge of our times.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. May follow-up question, especially do sa presentation ni Attorney Bagares. The question says, how does sphere sovereignty offer a corrective to the separation of church and state that is often understood by many evangelicals in terms of Romans 13?
Yeah, una-una kasi I think yung notion ng church, no, sa Reformation tradition, ano yan, may distinction na ginagawa, no, between the organic church and the institutional church. So yung institutional church, yung church gathered for the sacraments every Sunday or every holiday, partaking with the communion, exercising baptism, prayer, discipling, no. Yung organic church, yun yung Christians, the universal body of Christ in the ordinary life, as lawyers, as teachers, no, meaning in their different stations of life, no? But they're not separate, they're connected. Yung root and branch, kasi yung mga Kristiyano sa araw-araw, kailangan nila magsamba para ma-renew sila spiritually, no? Pero yung spirituality nila na express, so ang political life should be done by the church organic, not by the institutional church, no? So yung sphere sovereignty therefore means that there is a proper use for the pulpit, no? So yung pulpito, opisina din yan, no? At hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yan for partisan politics, no? But of course, there are rare instances, but that really requires, exigent circumstances, no? But in other terms, well, maybe the difference is that yung simbahan natin sa Pilipinas ay talagang nasa mababa pang antas, no? Hindi kagaya sa Europa, malayo na yung, malayo yung kanilang expressions ng modernity, no? Kaya very clear sa kanila yung differentiation ng functions, no? So may lawyers, no? At sila yung dapat na nakikialam sa politika, hindi yung church as institution, no? So sphere sovereignty means that you respect the boundaries, the nature of the church as institutional church. Pero yung organic, pwedeng mag-engage sa politics yun, no? As politicians, as Christian organizations, Christian schools, no? Kaya nga doon sa nangyari noon sa Netherlands in the early 20s, no? The flowering of the Christian democratic movement. Nagtayo sila ng sarili nilang political party, sariling eskwelahan, free from the control of church and state, sarili nilang radio station, sariling dyaryo, no? At to pursue that idea that you really have this pluralist society, no? Na hindi mo siya pwedeng i-reduce to just individual. Kasi the liberal vision is very strong today, is that you have nothing else other than individuals. So pag pinag-usapan ng religious freedom, individual right yan to believe. But it ignores the fact that faith is communal, no? The same as I said earlier, ganun din yung academic freedom, no? Yung academic freedom is properly protected in sphere sovereignty, because it means that teaching should be freed from politics, no? And that the school itself has freedoms distinct and separate from the individual freedom of faculty members, no? So yun yung napaka-powerful ng notion ng sphere sovereignty, no? If we actually, and it has been worked out in different contexts, no? We're not just familiar with it because we come from a different social history. Sabi nga ni Doc, I come from a different social history when I was a younger Christian, no? Na pietistic, no? And therefore, what we need to do is to become more familiar with this stream. No, we're not saying it's the best. No, we're just saying that it is another perspective, and it has a long history of political engagements. No, and in fact, hanggang ngayon may mga Christian parties pa rin na coming from the tradition in the Netherlands, no, and still trying to get the idea of Christianity as a proper basis for civilization. No, meron sa Mexico, they started also putting up a political party along these lines. No, in the US, may matagal na movement carried out by the Center for Public Justice. No, at they gave it a modern name, the idea of principled pluralism. No, yung sphere sovereignty, ginawa nila, binigyan nila ng bagong pangalan, principled pluralism, to explain it to a new generation, but it comes from the same perspective. No, my question related dito, what makes the church a higher institution? Well, dun sa Roman Catholic version, yung common good, subsidiarity, nasa taas talaga kasi merong differentiation between the nature and grace, in the realms of grace and nature. It's difficult to explain, but that's the implication of the Aristotelian philosophy that informs atomism, no? Na nasa taas talaga yung church, no? Nasa canon law yan, na may mga hindi pa inaalis doon despite the papal encyclicals, no? Pero nasa baba yung state, baba siya ng church, no? So may hierarchy sa principle, sa sphere sovereignty, walang mataas, lahat ay isa lang yung sovereign talaga, yung Diyos. Everybody answers, marriages, schools, markets, the state, no, answer to God. There's no other higher than that, no. Ngayon, useful yung subsidiarity, palagay ko, in the sense of intra-institutional. Halimbawa, yung subsidiarity sa principle ng local government, proper yun kasi part-whole relations yun eh. So yung criticism ng Protestant tradition sa subsidiarity, as explained by Jacques Maritain, by the neo-Thomist tradition, is that it's very hierarchical, no. It's just one way na lahat ng sa baba answers to the state, and the state answers to the church, no. So marami, in practical terms, marami ang ibig sabihin, but if you look at the presentation of Bishop Ledesma, the details actually echo reformational themes. So in the abstract, it's hierarchical, but you can see that when you look at the particular passages of Catholic, yung compendium of social teaching, no, makapal yan, 300 plus pages, no, makikita mo na actually, pagka in-apply mo yan, yung mga particularities, meron siyang reformational echoes, no? The theory is different, pero doon sa particularities, but we can quibble about the notion of the common good, for instance, which is a long discussion. But you can say that there are, in fact, echoes and parallels between the tradition of reformational thinking and Catholic social teaching in many ways. No, so that's really beautiful in that sense, no. But again, there are differences, no, and that's what makes us appreciate the different Christian traditions. So this is a particular tradition, meron siyang strength, may weakness din yung reformational thinking. Yung Catholic teaching, meron siyang strength, meron din siyang weakness. So kailangan nating tingnan yan, paano natin palakasin yung parehong tradisyon para mas maganda yung resulta sa lipunan natin, no? So hindi mataas yung church in that sense, kasi iba yung function ng church sa state eh. The church is never higher than the state, nor is the state higher than the church in that sense. It has to do with the nature of each institution. And then again, the distinction between the church institute and the church organic, no. So sa atin, kailangan natin paramihin yung mga Christian organizations. Marami na tayo. Aztecs, no. Ang kulang na lang Christian political party na properly founded on a political theory. Yun ang kulang sa atin, no. Wala tayong ganon, no, na malinaw yung framework ng engagement. What is normative politics? Sa atin kasi, basta mag-elect ka ng Christian, okay na yon, no? What is our position on the WTO? What about climate change? What about same-sex marriage? What about the introduction of all these new things, artificial intelligence? If you don't have a political philosophy, you will be lost. So yun ang problema, yun ang challenge sa atin. We really need to build a political movement, a political party along distinctive Christian lines. So the Catholics are really ahead of us, no? Kasi they have the Catholic social teaching eh, no? And sa atin eh pachi-pachi at kung ano yung political na galing nakuha ng ibang mga aktivista sila, yun ang kanilang sinasama ngayon, no? Na may mga aspects din, elements din na hindi naman siya talaga naaayon sa biblical teaching, no? So yun yung at least how I look at it. And I'm not saying that this is the definite view, no? But I'm trying to explain this tradition to us today.
So mukha pala talagang marami nang nakasulat pero hindi pa lang natin talagang sama-samang tiningnan kung ano yung mga nakasulat doon para tayo sama-samang magnilay-nilay. Babalik ko ang tanong, according kay Timothy Irwin mo, sa bigat ng mga problemang masa, feel nila na wala silang power para makontrol ang mga norms sa mundo. Tendency ng karamihan ay pipili na lang ng mga magpapagaan ng buhay at saan sila makakarapos. Example, ang nangyari sa eleksyon. Ano po sa tingin ninyo ang pwedeng approach? Magagawa ba nating understandable sa kanila ang ganitong theology? Kahit alam at naiintindihan nila itong turo, paano pag wala silang moral energy sa nabanggit kong context?
Okay, so sabi ko nga, dalawa kasi yung traditional political theory ng civil society. You have the body politic. Lahat yun estado. But pagpasok ng ibang tradition, so yung liberal naman na civil society, yung body politic na reduce doon sa mga individuals, no. Dito makikita mo na iba't iba, no. So iba yung political spheres, meron talagang non-political sphere. So yun yung mga realm ng NGOs, no. Marami naman ganun, no. Kagaya na familiar ako sa trabaho ni na Timothy, ano, yung isang organization na tinutulungan ko ay katuwang nila doon sa pagbibigay ng agahan sa mga street dwellers sa Quezon City. Napakarami, 600 families. Anong ginagawa ng gobyerno diyan, no? Ngayon kung iiwan natin sa gobyerno diyan, walang mangyayari, no? So kaya nga ang perspective na to talaga hindi siya inaasa lahat sa gobyerno. Mayroon siya proper understanding na yung gobyerno mayroon siyang proper function, no? At ang trabaho ng gobyerno is to make sure na yung diversity sa society, no, lang iba't ibang spheres will be respected because they contributed to a fuller idea of human flourishing, no. At isang problema nga diyan, iniisip kasi natin na pag nanalo yung presidente natin kandidato natin panalo na, no. Hindi ganoon kasi mahaba ang politika, sabi nga doon sa last quote, di ba? Para siyang raising children. Kasi to quote from one of my favorite pastoral theologians, no. It's a long obedience in the same direction. No, it's an ordinary. Politics should be treated as ordinary. It's part of our creational responsibilities, and it's not going to change. I mean, when we win one aspect, it's not going to end there. Kaya politics is anticipatory, no? And until the eschaton, we will keep on. Christians will always anticipate the eschaton, the full disclosure of Jesus Christ, no? And that is why politics should have a proper place. Not, it's like it's going to save all of us, no. Politics has a place, and it's not the all encompassing. Kasi maraming non-political responsibilities tayo sa mga magulang natin, sa ating mga anak, sa asawa natin, sa ating simbahan, sa ating social club, sa mga kaibigan natin. Mga non-political spheres yun. Dapat nga ideally hindi dapat kasama yun sa political. Pero nangyayari ngayon, the politics has seeped into all spheres, has made every other relations toxic. And we should not think in those terms. Because politics is not going to save us. But politics is part of our responsibility. Now, parang paradoxical yun. But yun exactly yung sinasabi ko, no, na tingnan natin kasi iba-iba yung spheres ng buhay natin, no, at iba-iba yung dimension nun, iba-iba yung character and nature nun, no. So sa simbahan, no, nakakalungkot, no. And personally, kaya nga ako, as much as possible, the pulpit should not be the pulpit of one candidate because precisely, no, pwede mong yung kandidato nila ay mabuti ngayon, but after 5 years baka maging corrupt din yan. What happens now to the endorsement of the church, of the pulpit? It lessens the integrity of the pulpit, no? But the political work is done by the church organic, not by the institutional church, at least from the tradition, no? Now, how do we get there? Kasi nga, malayo pa tayo. So kailangan natin, yung mga pastor natin, hindi na nga alam yan . Ang alam na nga nila, Romans 13, di ba? So, politics is a long obedience in the same direction. We need Christians to study political science, carried out along political lines. We need Christians to study sociology. Yung idea kasi natin ng Christian students ay mag-share, payagan na mag-share ng four spiritual laws and that's good. I'm not saying it's bad, no? Pero if you're a Christian political scientist, the question is there a Christian political science? How does it look? How would it look like? What about sociology? Is there a Christian sociology? How will it look like? How do we reform? How do we carry out the inner reformation of the sciences? Yun ang sinasabi ng Kuyperian tradition eh. Na kailangan natin i-reform yung mga sciences na yan because they have been led away and they have led to the secularization of society are away from godly ends. No? So in the universe, we are taught that that reality is socially constructed, and all our school Christians universe students repeat that without any thinking, no. And yet, on Sundays, they will say, "I believe in God, the Father Almighty, Creator, Maker of heaven and earth." Ano na ibig sabihin nun? Wala, di ba? Kasi hindi na naintindihan ng ibig sabihin ng faith nila. No? Na may express dapat yan sa kanilang scholarly endeavor, sa kanilang vocational endeavor, at sa kanilang political work, even sa kanilang artistic work, because even art needs no justification because art is part of creational reality. And there are norms for art. And the task of Christians is to disclose what those norms are by doing excellent artwork.
Thank you, Atty. Bagares. Mukha talagang long obedience in the same direction. Bilang pagtatapos, siguro babasahin ko na lang itong last sentiment na ni Ginoong Ber Ramos. At after that, hihingin po namin ng inyong mga last words para po sa ating mga nanonood sa gabi nito. Sabi ni Ginoong Ber Ramos, sad to say, the result of election reflects the lack of critical discourse inside the church, both the leaders and the members about politics and faith. The Philippine faith spectrum is riven with strife. Religious people advocate peace, yet they are silent in the face of violence. They shout for justice while condoning corrupt officials. They prayed for the nation's healing, but were deaf to the cries of the oppressed. They believe in God's sovereignty while neglecting the responsibility to disarm the evilness of the world in which they have the authority to do so. When we superficially brush off the political realities that need urgent attention, action, and vigilance, we unconsciously dismiss our divine mandate and political responsibility as co-workers in expanding the kingdom of God through justice and nonviolent resistance. Demonization of political will is allowing evil to triumph and neglecting our prophetic mission to defend the oppressed and judge the oppressor. Magandang mga pananalita, pero I want to hear from the last, mga last thoughts ni Attorney Romel Bagares and then kay Dr. Lim bilang pagtatapos.
Well, gusto ko lang siguro for further reading, no, gusto ko lang i-introduce yung mga ginamit ko na resources, no. So makikita po natin dito, actually nandiyan yung libro ni Ate Melba because many of what I have said were first articulated in the book Transforming Society. Reform Public Theology, I have an essay there on the Duterte power politics, which also written along the tradition. Faith and Bind, which is being given away as a prize. No, I was part of the initiative of this book, but unfortunately, because of my busy commitments, I was not able to submit my contribution. But there's another book project called Faith and Politics. This is the project. And I hope that this time around I will be able to contribute. So these are some of the books that I used as a reference. Creation Regained by Albert Walters, The Good of Politics by James Killen, Political Visions and Illusions by David Coises, and Contours of the Kuyperian Tradition by Craig Bartholomew, who incidentally also wrote a blurb for Faith and Bayan. So these are some of the works that broadly, in many ways, express the idea of a normative politics. So I hope that you will consider also digging deeper into this, also for Christians, for the youth, no, to take the academic, scholarly, and political seriously, and really study deeper, and work. We should look at politics in terms of 50 and 100 years, not in terms of 6 years. No, kaya long obedience in the same direction. So I think what we need really right now is education. No, yung building of Christian political organizations, Christian parties, Christian movement for a normative politics. So, thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Dr. Lim?
Well, for me, it's good to emphasize tonight that it is a process and it is a long obedience, and we really have much to work on. Um, just remember 1978. Okay, that was the year that evangelical theologizing in a more, let's say, reformational way started with the institutionalization of Isaac. And it was founded then. That was the same year that I started to teach church and culture at Asian Theological Seminary. So and it would take another 15 years before I would write my first book on transforming communities. So with Atimelda, with Patmos, and Isip Isaac, and all those have been part of our enriching a generation of pastors and Bible school teachers who have a wider paradigm than just Romans 13. Okay, and so and it's a long and sometimes disappointing, frustrating journey. Pero at least we have started and we have produced the books. And thank God, most of the books that are being published are now in a more, what we will now call, a more critical and more progressive understanding. And tonight is a model of how we trying to produce another book that will hopefully become a textbook in our seminaries and Bible schools. Will help the evangelical pastors and PCEC related churches. But hopefully it will be read also by the Roman Catholic seminaries and read by the NCCP related seminaries. And then together, the Christian church will be enriched, in our involvement to create a better society, a better common good, and a better, politics, so that in our next elections we improve, in the voting power of the evangelical church. Well, in the meantime, let's just enjoy, relax, and enjoy the ride. Given the new learnings that we have, and be patient, just be vocal, uh, try to be as visible as possible. I have used my Facebook page as my pulpit, okay, and as well as my lectern to teach whatever I believe is the way forward. So, and I hope all of us will become, those of you who are participants tonight, thank you for joining us. And whatever you have learned tonight, feel free to express it wherever you can. And let us be little prophets in our own right, and continue to produce the evangelical political theology that we want to see happen. And so welcome to this inner circle of those who are aspiring to become leaders in shaping the church of the future. And so join us, and we look forward to you becoming the megaphones to highlight this to the other denominational leaders and other seminarians who are struggling to be the future leaders of the church, but they will have a better understanding of church and state, uh, and having a normative politics that is not just imprisoned to the pietistic interpretation of Romans 13.
Thank you very much to our presenter, Attorney Bagares, and Dr. Archbishop Ledesma, and also Dr. Lim for the very informative reflections that you have shared with us today. And also, this is an invitation for all of us to come together and reflect. At bilang pagpapalalim ng ating mga reflections, in-invite po namin kayo na sumama sa amin at mag-order ng Faith and Bayan. We will have an official launch of the book on June 25. Again, dito po ako po si Sukha Valdez. Nagpapasalamat po na kayo po ay sumama sa amin sa discourse para sa gabi ito. Join us again next week sa Faith and Politics. Magandang gabi po sa atin.